Imagine that a medieval villager from the year 1300 suddenly appeared in your bedroom tonight. Not a king, not a knight, just an ordinary person. Someone who spent their life farming, walking, working, and sleeping beneath the same stars you see today. At first, he would probably be amazed. The lights, the technology, the warmth, the comfort. But after the amazement faded, something else would happen. He would start asking questions. Strange questions. Questions that we rarely ask ourselves. Why do you carry a glowing object everywhere you go? Why does it constantly demand your attention? Why do you know the names of people you'll never meet? Why do you worry about events happening thousands of miles away? And perhaps strangest of all, why do you seem so exhausted? After all, from his perspective, you have machines doing your work, you have instant access to food, you have warm homes, soft beds, medicine, and conveniences beyond anything he could have imagined. So why are so many people still tired, still anxious, still overwhelmed? A medieval villager might not understand everything about our world, but he might notice a few things that we no longer see. And tonight, we're going to explore some of them. Not because medieval life was better, it certainly wasn't. Life was often hard, cold, dangerous, and painfully short. But sometimes people living in a completely different world can help us understand our own. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's spend some time imagining what a medieval villager would think if he met us today. Chapter 1. The Man Who Knew Everyone. Let's begin with something surprisingly simple. People. Because if there is one thing that would immediately confuse a medieval villager, it would be the number of people surrounding us. And at the same time, the number of people who aren't really there. That sounds strange, but let me explain. Imagine a small medieval village. Perhaps 100 people, maybe 200. Everyone knows everyone, not just their names, their stories, their families, their habits, their strengths, their weaknesses. The baker knows the blacksmith knows the farmer knows the shepherd. And everyone knows who snores, who tells the best stories, who works the hardest, and who always arrives late. A medieval villager might spend his entire life without ever meeting more than a few hundred people. Now think about your own life. How many names could you recognize? Hundreds? Thousands? Perhaps even tens of thousands. There are people on social media, people on television, people on YouTube, people at work, people from school, people you've never met, people you'll never meet. And yet, despite being more connected than any humans in history, many people feel surprisingly alone. That idea would be difficult for a medieval villager to understand. Imagine trying to explain it. You tell him, "I have 600 friends online." He nods, impressed. Then he asks a simple question. "If your cart breaks down tomorrow, how many of them will come help you?" Suddenly the number feels different, because a medieval villager measured relationships differently. Not by visibility, but by reliability. Not by followers, but by familiarity. Now, before we continue, if you're enjoying this journey through history and psychology, consider subscribing. And I'm curious, what time do you usually fall asleep? Let me know in the comments. Now let's continue, because our medieval visitor is only becoming more confused. You see, in his world, people rarely had privacy. That sounds terrible to modern ears, but it came with something unexpected. People rarely disappeared. You saw the same faces every day, the same neighbors, the same families, the same routines, the same conversations, over and over again. Today, many of us can go days, sometimes weeks, without speaking to the people who live closest to us. Some people know more about influencers than they know about their own neighbors. And if you explain that to a medieval villager, he would probably stare at you in complete disbelief. Not because he was wiser, not because he was smarter, but because the idea would feel completely backwards. To him, the most important people in your life would naturally be the people physically around you. The people you work beside, eat beside, walk beside, grow old beside. Our attention is often pulled somewhere else, toward distant people, distant events, distant opinions. A medieval villager might find this fascinating, and perhaps a little tragic. But then again, he would probably be equally shocked by something else. The fact that many of us spend hours every day looking at people who seem happier, more successful, more attractive, more accomplished. Because in his world, comparison had limits. A blacksmith compared himself to other blacksmiths nearby. A farmer compared himself to other farmers nearby. That was about it. Today, a teenager in a small town can compare himself to millions of people before breakfast. And our medieval visitor would probably wonder how any human mind was supposed to handle that, because for most of history, it never had to. And perhaps that is where the real surprise begins. Not that our world is more complicated, not that our world is more advanced, but that our brains are still remarkably similar. The same fears, the same hopes, the same desire to belong, the same need for connection. Only now, those ancient minds must navigate a world they were never designed to understand. And our medieval villager is only beginning to notice. Because next, he is about to discover something even stranger. A small glowing rectangle that millions of people willingly carry everywhere they go. Chapter 2. The Endless Marketplace. Let's continue, because our medieval visitor has now noticed something even stranger than social media. Something so ordinary that most of us barely think about it anymore. Choice. Not freedom, not technology, not wealth. Choice itself, and more specifically, the endless amount of it. Imagine taking a medieval baker and bringing him into a modern supermarket. At first, he would probably assume the building was some kind of royal palace. The lights, the shelves, the abundance. Food from every direction. Food from every season. Food from places he has never heard of. And for a moment, he would simply stare. But eventually, his attention would settle on something much smaller. A shelf, one ordinary shelf. Toothpaste, rows and rows of toothpaste. Whitening toothpaste, sensitive toothpaste, extra whitening toothpaste, charcoal toothpaste, mint toothpaste, advanced toothpaste, professional toothpaste, natural toothpaste, clinical toothpaste, complete protection toothpaste. And after reading a few labels, he might turn toward you and ask a simple question. Which one works? You explain that they all work, and suddenly he becomes even more confused. Because if they all work, why are there so many? For most of human history, this problem barely existed. You bought bread from the baker, you bought shoes from the shoemaker, you bought cloth from the cloth merchant. There were choices. Of course there were, but there were limits. A medieval villager might compare 3 types of bread. Perhaps 4, not 47, and certainly not 470. Today, many of us make more decisions before lunch than some people made in several days. What should I wear? What should I eat? Which route should I take? Which podcast should I listen to? Which video should I watch? Which streaming service should I open? Which series should I start? Which product should I buy? Which review should I trust? And all of these decisions consume something, attention. Not much, just a little, but they add up. Tiny pieces of attention, tiny pieces of energy, tiny pieces of focus, until eventually something interesting happens. The choices that were supposed to make life easier start making life harder. A medieval baker would probably find this fascinating, because from his perspective, many modern people spend enormous amounts of effort trying to optimize decisions that barely matter. And before you disagree, consider something. Have you ever opened Netflix, looking for something to watch, and then spent 20 minutes searching without watching anything at all? Perhaps 30 minutes, perhaps longer. Maybe you've even reached the point where you gave up entirely. You had thousands of options, and somehow ended up choosing nothing. Now imagine explaining this to someone from the year 1300. You enter a room. A giant magical screen appears. It contains more entertainment than entire kingdoms once possessed. Stories, music, comedy, drama, adventure, knowledge, everything. And yet, instead of enjoying it, you spend half an hour scrolling, looking, comparing, searching. A medieval baker would probably assume he misunderstood something. Surely the problem cannot be the abundance itself. And yet, sometimes it is. Psychologists today call this the paradox of choice, the idea that more options can sometimes make us less satisfied, not more satisfied, less, because every option creates another question, and every question creates another possibility, and every possibility creates another doubt. What if there's a better movie, a better restaurant, a better job, a better investment, a better relationship, a better decision, a better version of the life I'm already living? For a medieval villager, these questions would sound unusual, not because life was simple, life was anything but simple, but because many choices simply did not exist. The village was the village, the baker was the baker, the road was the road, and tomorrow would likely look very similar to today. That stability came with disadvantages, many disadvantages, but it also removed an invisible burden, the burden of endless comparison. And speaking of comparison, our visitor has now discovered something else. Music, or rather, all of the music ever recorded. Imagine handing Spotify to a medieval villager. For a few moments, he would be speechless. Thousands of songs, no, millions, available instantly, from every culture, every country, every style, every era, a miracle beyond imagination. And yet, what would truly surprise him is how difficult we sometimes find it to choose one. You search, skip, listen for 10 seconds, skip again, another song, another artist, another playlist, another recommendation, and somewhere along the way, the search begins to replace the experience. You spend more time looking for music than listening to it. Again, our medieval visitor would be confused, because to him, music was an event, a gathering, a memory, a shared experience, not an infinite catalog. And perhaps that is one of the strangest things about modern abundance. When something becomes limitless, it can sometimes feel less valuable, not more. Now consider dating. This may be the most confusing discovery of all, because for most of history, people met through families, communities, neighbors, shared lives, shared routines, shared places. Today, many people carry thousands of potential romantic partners in their pocket. A medieval villager would likely find this astonishing, at first, but then he would start asking questions, and the questions would become increasingly difficult. If there are so many options, why are people still lonely? Why are people still searching? If there are so many connections, why do so many relationships feel fragile? He might not know the answers. To be fair, neither do we, but he would notice something important. When possibilities become endless, commitment becomes harder, because every decision closes other doors, and closing doors has become surprisingly uncomfortable for modern people. Perhaps you felt it yourself. You choose one movie and wonder if another would have been better. You choose one restaurant and wonder if you made the right choice. You choose one career path and wonder about the paths you never took. You choose one city, one home, one opportunity, and somewhere in the background, your mind keeps imagining alternatives. A medieval villager would probably recognize the emotion. Humans have always wondered about different possibilities, but he might be surprised by the scale, because today, the number of alternatives is almost infinite, and our ancient brains were never designed for infinite alternatives. They were designed for enough, not endless, enough. And perhaps that is why so many people feel mentally exhausted, not because they are weak, not because they are failing, but because they are navigating a marketplace far larger than any human mind was originally built to handle. And as our medieval visitor quietly looks around, he begins to realize something. The modern world does not suffer from scarcity, it suffers from abundance. Too many choices, too many possibilities, too many voices competing for attention, and soon, he is about to discover an invention that brings all of those things together. A small glowing rectangle that fits inside a pocket and somehow contains an entire world. Chapter 3. The Strange Glowing Rectangle. Our medieval visitor has now spent some time in the modern world. He has seen the endless choices, the endless entertainment, the endless possibilities. And although many things still confuse him, he believes he is beginning to understand, at least until he notices something strange, something small, something ordinary, something almost everyone carries. A glowing rectangle, no larger than a book, small enough to fit inside a pocket. At first, he doesn't think much of it. Why would he? After all, compared to airplanes, towering skyscrapers, or electric lights, it seems rather unremarkable. But then he begins to watch, and the longer he watches, the stranger it becomes, because people carry it everywhere. They carry it while walking, while eating, while working, while resting. Some even place it beside their bed, as though it were a trusted companion. And from his perspective, that would be deeply unusual, because for most of human history, objects served people. People did not serve objects. Yet this small glowing rectangle seems different. People constantly check it, constantly touch it, constantly return to it, almost as if it possesses a gravitational pull. A medieval villager might spend days simply observing this behavior, trying to understand, trying to discover what makes the object so important. And eventually, someone would show him. Imagine handing a smartphone to someone from the year 1300, not gradually, not with explanations, not over weeks or months, immediately. The experience would likely feel supernatural. A device that can answer questions, show distant lands, reveal faces from across the planet, play music, display stories, predict weather, provide directions, translate languages, and communicate instantly across continents. To a medieval villager, this would appear less like technology and more like magic, the kind of magic that kings would have envied, the kind of magic that scholars would have devoted entire lifetimes to understanding, the kind of magic that would have seemed impossible, and yet for many modern people, it barely feels remarkable anymore. That fact alone would probably surprise him, because human beings have a curious ability. We quickly become accustomed to miracles. The first time we see them, they seem extraordinary. The thousandth time, they seem normal. And perhaps no object demonstrates that better than the smartphone. But after the amazement fades, our visitor notices something else, something far more interesting. He notices how often people use it. Not occasionally, not when necessary, but constantly. A spare moment appears, the rectangle emerges. A line at a store, the rectangle emerges. A traffic light, the rectangle emerges. An elevator ride, the rectangle emerges. A quiet moment alone, the rectangle emerges. Again, and again. At first he assumes there must be urgent news, some emergency, some important message, some vital piece of information. But eventually he realizes something. Most of the time, there isn't. And that realization leaves him puzzled, because for most of history, empty moments were simply part of life. Waiting happened, walking happened, silence happened, boredom happened, and because these things happened, the mind learned how to live with them. A shepherd might spend hours crossing open fields, listening only to the wind. A farmer might repair tools beside a fire late into the evening. A fisherman might stare across still water for long stretches of time. Nothing exciting was happening, nothing entertaining, nothing stimulating, and that was perfectly normal. Today, many of those empty moments disappear almost instantly. A few seconds of waiting, and a screen appears. A moment of silence, and a screen appears. A hint of boredom, and a screen appears. It happens so naturally that most people barely notice it, but our visitor notices, because to him the behavior looks unusual, almost as if modern people are fleeing from stillness, not intentionally, not consciously, but habitually, and he begins to wonder whether something has changed, not in the technology, in the relationship people have with their own thoughts, because when empty moments disappear, something else disappears with them. Reflection, wandering thoughts, daydreams, quiet observation, the strange little conversations we have with ourselves when nothing else demands our attention. For thousands of years, those moments arrive naturally. Today, they are increasingly optional, and when something becomes optional, people often stop doing it. Now our visitor notices another strange thing. The smartphone is silent, yet somehow it seems louder than anything he has ever encountered, not because it makes noise, but because it constantly competes for attention. Every notification, every headline, every recommendation, every message, every update, every alert, every reminder, each one asking for a tiny piece of awareness, a tiny piece of focus, a tiny piece of attention. One by one, they seem insignificant. Together they become something else entirely, because unlike previous generations, modern people rarely leave the marketplace. The marketplace follows them, into their homes, into their kitchens, into their bedrooms, into their pockets, into their thoughts. For a medieval villager, this would be difficult to imagine, because in his world information had boundaries. When you left the village, much of the noise stayed behind. When you entered the forest became the experience. When darkness arrived, the day was largely over. Today, many people carry the entire world with them, every hour of every day, and perhaps nowhere is that more obvious. Then social media. Eventually, someone introduces our visitor to it. At first, he is impressed. Faces from distant lands, stories from distant places, knowledge shared instantly. The idea itself seems remarkable. Then he keeps scrolling, and scrolling, and scrolling, and gradually his fascination begins to change, because he notices something strange. There never seems to be an end. More images, more stories, more opinions, more news, more videos, more information, always more. The river never ends, the road never ends, the scroll never ends, and that endlessness would feel unnatural to him, because nearly everything in the medieval world had limits. A meal ended, a conversation ended, a song ended, a journey ended. Even the longest story eventually reached its final page. But here, the next page never stops arriving, the next opinion never stops arriving, the next video never stops arriving, the next distraction never stops arriving, and perhaps that changes us more than we realize, because human beings evolved in a world of endings, not a world of infinite continuation. Our visitor does not understand neuroscience, he does not understand dopamine, he does not understand algorithms, but he understands people, and he recognizes something familiar, the same curiosity, the same fears, the same desire for belonging, the same desire for status, the same desire for certainty, the same desire to know what everyone else is doing. Those things are not modern, they are ancient, they have always existed. The difference is that modern technology can feed them endlessly, and our ancient minds never evolved for endlessness. They evolved for enough food, enough information, enough social contact, enough certainty, enough, not infinite, enough. As the evening grows darker, our visitor continues staring at the glowing rectangle, and perhaps for the first time, he begins to understand modern life, not because he understands the technology, but because he understands the people using it. The rectangle is not really the story is what it promises: connection, entertainment, knowledge, possibility, belonging, and perhaps that is why it is so difficult to put down. But soon our visitor is about to discover something even stranger, something that existed long before smartphones, long before electricity, long before modern life itself, a force that has quietly shaped human behavior for thousands of years: comparison, and what happens when we can never stop doing it. Chapter 4. The Village Without Comparison. Our medieval visitor has now begun to understand the strange glowing rectangle. He understands the endless stream of information, the endless stream of entertainment, the endless stream of distractions. But there is one consequence of all this that still confuses him, and he notices it almost everywhere he goes: people comparing themselves, constantly, quietly, relentlessly. At first, it seems harmless. A glance, a thought, a moment of curiosity. But the longer he watches, the more unusual it becomes. Because comparison itself is not new. Human beings have always compared themselves to others. A farmer compared himself to neighboring farmers. A merchant compared himself to other merchants. A blacksmith compared himself to other blacksmiths. That part would feel familiar, but the scale would feel completely alien. Imagine a medieval villager waking up tomorrow morning. Before breakfast, he compares himself to a billionaire, an athlete, a celebrity, a musician, a model, a business owner, a traveler, a stranger living on the other side of the planet. Then he spends the rest of the day doing the same thing. Our visitor would likely find this exhausting, because for most of history, comparison had natural limits. The people around you formed the boundaries of your social world. You compared yourself to people you actually knew, people you worked beside, people you lived beside, people whose struggles you could see, and whose flaws you could see. That last part is important, because when you know someone personally, you rarely compare yourself to an idealized version of them. You see the whole picture. You see the successes, but you also see the failures, the mistakes, the frustrations, the ordinary moments. Today, many comparisons happen differently. A medieval villager would notice that modern people often compare their everyday lives to someone else's highlight reel. He would not use those words, of course, but he would understand the concept. Imagine only seeing the best harvest, the best meal, the best clothing, the best moments, without ever seeing the difficult parts. The comparison becomes distorted. And distorted comparisons often produce distorted conclusions. Our visitor might begin to wonder why so many people feel behind. Because from his perspective, many modern people appear to be running races they never consciously agreed to enter. More money, more followers, more status, more productivity, more achievement, more visibility, more success, always more. And whenever one goal is reached, another appears. A medieval villager would recognize ambition. Ambition is not new, but endless ambition might feel unfamiliar. Because in his world, there were natural stopping points. The harvest was complete, the bread was baked, the market closed, night arrived, the day ended. Many goals have no obvious finish line. How much money is enough? How much success is enough? How many followers are enough? How much recognition is enough? The answers seem to move further away, the closer people get to them. And that would fascinate our visitor, because human beings are remarkably adaptable. We become accustomed to improvements very quickly. The larger house becomes normal. The better job becomes normal. The higher income becomes normal. The achievement becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, the mind begins searching for the next thing. Not because people are greedy. Not necessarily, because adaptation is simply part of being human. Our visitor would likely understand this instinctively. After all, medieval villagers adapted too. A good harvest eventually felt normal. A new tool eventually felt normal. A period of peace eventually felt normal. The difference is the speed. Modern life provides new things to compare against every single day, every hour, sometimes every minute. And nowhere is this more visible than on social media. Imagine explaining social media to a medieval villager. You show him a platform where millions of people display carefully selected pieces of their lives, their achievements, their travels, their celebrations, their victories. At first, he would probably think it sounds like a festival, but then he would realize something. The festival never ends. And that realization might concern him, because festivals were special precisely because they were temporary. The ordinary days made the celebrations meaningful. Without ordinary life, even extraordinary moments eventually lose their impact. And perhaps that is one reason why modern comparison can feel so powerful. The extraordinary is no longer occasional. It appears continuously, hour after hour, day after day, year after year, until the mind quietly begins treating extraordinary experiences as normal expectations, and ordinary life starts feeling insufficient. Our visitor would find that deeply strange, not because ordinary life was always enjoyable, but because ordinary life was understood to be ordinary. A simple meal, a familiar road, a quiet evening, a conversation with neighbors. These things were not viewed as failures. They were simply life, and perhaps that perspective offered something valuable. Because comparison does not only affect happiness, it affects attention. The more we focus on what others have, the less we notice what is already present. The more we stare at distant lives, the less we experience our own. A medieval villager might describe this differently, but he would recognize the pattern. He would see people looking everywhere, except where they are standing, thinking about other lives, other opportunities, other possibilities, while their own life quietly unfolds around them. And perhaps that is one of the strangest consequences of comparison. It can make abundance feel like scarcity. It can make success feel inadequate. It can make good fortune feel disappointing, not because reality changed, but because perspective changed. As evening falls, our visitor watches people scrolling through endless images of other people's lives, and he begins to suspect something. Perhaps the problem is not that modern people have too little. Perhaps the problem is that they are constantly reminded of what they do not have. And those are two very different things. The first is a problem of reality, the second is a problem of attention. And our visitor is beginning to understand that modern life may be shaped by attention more than anything else. Because whatever people pay attention to grows, and whatever they ignore slowly disappears. But soon, our visitor is about to encounter something even stranger, something that modern people often try desperately to avoid, something that was once a completely ordinary part of everyday life. Boredom, and why losing it may have changed us more than we realize. Chapter 5. The Lost Art of Being Bored. Our medieval visitor has now seen many strange things. The endless choices, the endless information, the endless comparison. And although he finds all of them fascinating, there is one modern habit he struggles to understand more than any other. Not because it is complicated, but because it is so simple. Modern people seem terrified of boredom. Not everyone, not all the time, but often enough that he begins to notice a pattern. Whenever boredom approaches, something immediately appears to replace it. A screen, a notification, a video, a message, a headline, a game, a song, a distraction, anything at all, except boredom itself. And to our visitor, that seems unusual, because for most of human history, boredom was not an accident. It was a normal part of everyday life. A shepherd could spend hours watching sheep. A fisherman could spend hours waiting for a bite. A traveler could spend days following the same road. A farmer could spend entire afternoons performing repetitive tasks. Life contained long stretches of sameness, long stretches of waiting, long stretches where absolutely nothing exciting happened. And yet people survived them. In fact, they became quite good at surviving them. Today, many people experience something very different. The moment boredom appears, it is often interrupted. Imagine sitting alone in a quiet room. No television, no music, no notifications, no internet, no books, nothing demanding your attention. Just silence. How long would it take before you felt the urge to reach for something? A few minutes? A few seconds? Perhaps even less. Our visitor would find this fascinating, because to him, silence was not unusual. It was everywhere. In the fields, on the roads, in the forests, during the evenings, during the winter months. Sometimes there was nothing to do except think, and while that may sound unpleasant, it came with an unexpected benefit. People became familiar with their own minds. They spent time alone with their thoughts. Not because they wanted to, because they had no alternative. And that simple fact may have changed the way they experience life. Today, many thoughts never get the chance to fully develop. A moment of curiosity appears, a distraction interrupts it. A memory surfaces, a distraction interrupts it. An idea begins to form, a distraction interrupts it. And slowly, without realizing it, many people stop spending time inside their own minds. Our visitor might not understand psychology, but he would notice the difference. Because boredom serves a purpose, an unexpected purpose. It creates space. Space for reflection, space for imagination, space for creativity, space for questions. Many of humanity's greatest ideas probably began during moments that looked remarkably unproductive. A person walking, a person waiting, a person staring out a window, a person doing absolutely nothing. From the outside, it appears pointless. From the inside, something important is happening. The mind begins wandering, and wandering minds are surprisingly useful. Modern life often treats wandering as a problem, something to eliminate, something to optimize away. But our visitor would likely see it differently, because in his world the mind had room to roam. Imagine lying beneath the stars on a clear night. No screens, no notifications, no artificial light, nothing competing for your attention. Just darkness and your own thoughts. At first that sounds peaceful, then uncomfortable, then perhaps even frightening, because many modern people are no longer accustomed to uninterrupted thought. The silence becomes loud, the stillness becomes noticeable. The mind begins producing questions that have been waiting patiently for attention. And that may be one reason boredom feels uncomfortable. Not because boredom itself is painful, but because it removes distractions. And when distractions disappear, we often encounter ourselves. Our visitor would probably find this ironic, because modern people have access to more entertainment than anyone in history. Yet many still struggle to feel mentally rested. Perhaps because entertainment and rest are not always the same thing. A person can be entertained for hours and still feel exhausted. A person can spend an entire evening consuming content and still feel mentally crowded, because consumption and recovery are not identical. Our visitor would not use those words, but he might notice the result. He would notice how many people fill every spare moment, every waiting room, every queue, every train ride, every elevator ride, every quiet evening, every moment before sleep. And eventually, he would ask a question, a simple question, one that becomes difficult to answer. When was the last time you were truly bored? Not distracted, not entertained, not multitasking, not scrolling, not listening to something while doing something else. Just bored. The answer might surprise you, because genuine boredom has become surprisingly rare, and perhaps that matters more than we realize. After all, boredom once acted like a doorway to daydreaming, a doorway to reflection, a doorway to creativity, a doorway to self-understanding. Many of those doors still exist, but fewer people walk through them. Because modern life offers countless easier alternatives, and that brings our visitor to another strange realization. The modern world has become incredibly good at solving discomfort. Hungry, food arrives. Cold, heat appears. Lonely, entertainment is available. Bored, distraction is instantly accessible. Every inconvenience has a solution. Every moment of friction has an escape route. Our visitor begins to wonder whether something valuable disappeared along the way. Because some forms of discomfort once served a purpose. Hunger made food meaningful. Darkness made light meaningful. Distance made reunions meaningful. And perhaps, boredom made imagination meaningful. Without boredom, the imagination is rarely required to work. Without boredom, the mind rarely has reason to wander. Without boredom, many thoughts never have the chance to fully emerge. As night falls, our visitor notices one final thing. Many modern people are exhausted, not from physical labor, not from hunting, not from farming, not from carrying water, but from constant stimulation, a different kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of always consuming, always reacting, always paying attention, always receiving. And he begins to suspect that perhaps the human mind, like a field, sometimes needs empty space. Not because emptiness is valuable by itself, but because something valuable grows there. The same way crops need room to grow, the same way forests need open ground, the same way conversations need pauses. Perhaps minds need boredom, and perhaps that is why so many of humanity's greatest ideas arrived when nobody was trying to have them, while walking, while waiting, while staring into a fire, while watching clouds drift across the sky, while doing absolutely nothing at all. And as our visitor watches another person instinctively reach for the glowing rectangle, the moment a few seconds of boredom appears, he cannot help but wonder. What thoughts never arrive, what ideas never emerge, what discoveries never happen, because there is no longer any silence waiting for them. But soon, our visitor is about to discover something even stranger. Something that modern people spend much of their lives thinking about. Tomorrow, the future, the next week, the next year, the next version of themselves. And why the human mind has become so skilled at living somewhere that does not yet exist. Chapter 6. The Endless Future. Our medieval visitor has now discovered something curious. Modern people spend a remarkable amount of time living somewhere that does not exist. Not in their homes, not in their towns, not in the present moment, but in the future. A place that cannot be touched, cannot be visited, cannot be known. And yet many people spend hours there every day. At first, he barely notices it. After all, human beings have always thought about tomorrow. A farmer thinks about next season. A merchant thinks about next week's market. A parent thinks about their children's future. There is nothing unusual about that. The strange part is how far modern people travel, not physically, mentally. A medieval villager might worry about next winter. A modern person might worry about something that could happen 10 years from now, or 20, or perhaps something that never happens at all. And that distinction would fascinate our visitor, because much of modern anxiety seems to come not from reality, but from possibility. Imagine sitting quietly in a room. Nothing dangerous is happening. You are safe, warm, comfortable. And yet your mind begins constructing scenarios. What if the economy changes? What if I chose the wrong career? What if I never achieve my goals? What if I disappoint people? What if I miss an opportunity? What if I fail? What if everything changes? None of these things are happening. Not now. Yet the body often reacts as though they are. Our visitor would find this remarkable, because in his world, many dangers were visible. A failed harvest, a harsh winter, a broken tool, a spreading illness. The threat existed in front of you. Today, many threats exist primarily inside the imagination, and the imagination is capable of creating an unlimited number of them. That is both its greatest strength and its greatest weakness, because the same mind that can invent a cathedral can also invent a catastrophe. The same mind that can imagine success can imagine failure. The same mind that can dream can worry, and modern life provides endless material for both. Our visitor notices something else. Many people no longer compare themselves only to other people. They compare themselves to future versions of themselves, the person they hope to become, the person they think they should become, the person they imagined becoming years ago, and often, those imagined versions become impossible standards. A medieval villager would struggle to understand this, not because people lacked ambition, but because life often demanded attention here and now. The sheep needed feeding today, the bread needed baking today, the roof needed repairing today. Tomorrow would arrive eventually, but first today required attention. Modern people often experience the opposite. Today becomes a stepping stone, a means to an end, a waiting room for some future version of life. And while waiting, many miss the life already happening around them. Our visitor sees people postponing happiness just a little longer, just one more promotion, one more achievement, one more milestone, one more purchase, one more goal, then everything will be different. Then life will finally begin. But the strange thing is, the finish line keeps moving, because once one goal is reached, another appears, and another and another. The future remains just beyond reach, always waiting over the next hill. Our visitor would recognize something familiar here, the horizon. No matter how far you walk, it moves with you. Perhaps modern goals behave the same way, and perhaps that is why so many people feel trapped in pursuit, not because they are moving too slowly, because they never feel permitted to stop, never permitted to arrive, always preparing for the next thing, always optimizing, always planning, always improving, always becoming, rarely being. Now imagine explaining retirement to a medieval villager. The idea itself would seem extraordinary. Working for decades, saving resources, preparing for a distant future, a future 30 or 40 years away. The scale of that thinking would be astonishing, yet what might surprise him even more is how often people worry about futures they cannot predict. A future job, a future economy, a future crisis, a future opportunity, a future regret. Entire emotional storms created by events that have not happened and may never happen. Again, our visitor would not dismiss these concerns. Some future planning is wise, necessary even, but he might wonder where preparation ends and preoccupation begins, because there is a difference. One helps us, the other consumes us, and modern life often blurs the line. The more information available, the more futures become imaginable. Every article predicts something, every expert predicts something, every headline predicts something, and suddenly, the mind begins trying to prepare for all of them, an impossible task, because no human being can successfully prepare for every possible future, not even close. Our visitor understands something important. A farmer can prepare for winter, but not every possible winter. A sailor can prepare for storms, but not every possible storm. At some point, uncertainty must simply be accepted, and that acceptance seems increasingly rare. Modern people often feel that enough information should create certainty, but information rarely behaves that way. More information often creates more possibilities. More possibilities create more questions, and more questions create more imagined futures. The cycle continues, endlessly. Perhaps this is why so many people struggle to rest. The body lies in bed, but the mind keeps traveling to next week, next month, next year, next decade. The journey never stops. And as our visitor watches someone stare at the ceiling late at night, he realizes something. The person is not in their bedroom. Not really, their body is, but their attention is somewhere else entirely, living inside a future that does not yet exist, solving problems that have not yet appeared, preparing for conversations that have not yet happened, replaying possibilities that may never happen at all. And perhaps that is one of the strangest abilities humans possess, the ability to suffer from events that have not happened, to celebrate events that have not happened, to fear events that have not happened, to hope for events that have not happened. The future exists nowhere, except inside the mind, and yet it influences the present every day. As darkness settles across the village, our visitor reflects on everything he has seen, the endless choices, the glowing rectangle, the endless comparisons, the disappearance of boredom, and now, the endless future, a future that many people seem to visit so often that they forget to fully inhabit the present, not because they are foolish, not because they are weak, because they are human, and humans have always been dreamers. The difference is that modern life has given those dreams an almost infinite number of directions in which to travel. But soon, our visitor is about to discover something surprisingly simple, something that may explain why many medieval people felt calmer than we do. Not because their lives were easier, they weren't, but because they belonged to a place, to a community, to something larger than themselves, and why that feeling may be far rarer today than most people realize. Chapter 7. Belonging Somewhere. Our medieval visitor has spent a great deal of time observing modern life. He has seen the endless choices, the endless entertainment, the endless comparisons, the endless futures people carry inside their minds. And although much of it seems strange, one thing continues to puzzle him more than anything else. Many modern people appear connected to everything, yet connected to almost no one. At first, he struggles to understand why. After all, modern people can communicate instantly across continents. They can speak with hundreds of people, sometimes thousands. They can join communities, groups, forums, networks, platforms, entire worlds of connection, and yet many still feel alone. To our visitor, this would seem deeply confusing, because in his world, belonging was rarely something you searched for. It was simply there. Not always perfect, not always pleasant, but present. You belonged to a family, you belonged to a village, you belonged to a trade, you belonged to a place. The people around you knew your name, they knew your parents, they knew your habits, your strengths, your weaknesses, your history, and perhaps most importantly, they expected to see you tomorrow. That simple expectation created something powerful, a feeling that your presence mattered, that your absence would be noticed, that your life was woven into the lives of others. Our visitor would recognize that feeling immediately, because for most of human history, human beings lived inside small social circles, not because they preferred it, because they had no alternative. And those circles created something modern life often struggles to provide, a strong sense of belonging. Now imagine trying to explain modern mobility to a medieval villager. You tell him that people regularly move hundreds of miles away, sometimes thousands, that they change jobs, change cities, change social circles, sometimes multiple times throughout their lives. He would probably find that extraordinary, and perhaps a little unsettling, because in his world, the people around you were not temporary. They were part of the landscape, like the river, like the church, like the road leading into town, always there, always familiar. Of course, there were disadvantages. A medieval village could be restrictive. Gossip spread quickly. Privacy barely existed. Conflict was difficult to escape. Life was not ideal. But belonging rarely depended on achievement. You did not need to build a personal brand. You did not need followers. You did not need a carefully crafted identity. You simply existed within the community. And that existence itself created value. Our visitor notices something different in the modern world. Many people seem to feel they must earn belonging, earn approval, earn attention, earn acceptance, earn significance, rather than a condition. And that subtle difference changes everything. Because when belonging feels conditional, people begin performing. They begin managing impressions, curating identities, presenting idealized versions of themselves. And the more energy spent performing, the harder it becomes to feel truly known. After all, how can someone know you if they only ever meet the version you present? Our visitor would find this exhausting, not because he disliked self-improvement, but because it creates a difficult problem. The better the performance becomes, the harder it becomes to trust the applause. Was it appreciation, or was it appreciation for the performance? And somewhere along the way, many people begin wondering whether anyone actually knows them at all. That question rarely appeared in a medieval village, not because relationships were deeper, but because they were unavoidable. People saw one another constantly, during celebrations, during hardships, during failures, during ordinary days, especially during ordinary days. and ordinary days reveal things that performances cannot. Our visitor notices something else. Many modern friendships require scheduling, calendars, messages, coordination, finding available time. A medieval villager would probably smile at this idea, not because it is wrong, because it would feel unusual. Friendship happened naturally when people shared the same environment, the same roads, the same fields, the same routines, the same evenings. Modern life offers more freedom, but freedom often comes with trade-offs, and one of those trade-offs may be spontaneous connection, the kind that requires no planning, no invitation, no reminder, no notification, just proximity, just familiarity, just being there. Now consider something else. A medieval villager could spend his entire life in the same place, the same church bell, the same market square, the same forest, the same roads, year after year, decade after decade. Today, many people spend more time looking at digital places than physical ones, and our visitor would find that fascinating, because human beings evolved in places, real places, places with smells, weather, textures, landmarks, places that become part of memory, part of identity, part of belonging. Perhaps that is why so many people feel strangely attached to childhood homes, old neighborhoods, familiar streets, favorite cafes. Belonging is not only about people, it is also about place, and modern life often changes places faster than ever before. People move, businesses close, communities shift, neighborhoods transform. Everything becomes more fluid, more flexible, more adaptable, but sometimes also more temporary. Our visitor would likely wonder whether something important is lost when everything becomes temporary. Because belonging requires time, time to build trust, time to build familiarity, time to build shared memories. And those things cannot be rushed. They emerge slowly, the way forests grow, the way friendships deepen, the way communities form, one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one ordinary moment at a time. As evening approaches, our visitor watches people rushing through their lives, moving from task to task, goal to goal, notification to notification. And he notices something remarkable. Many people are surrounded by others, yet rarely feel fully seen, surrounded by communication, yet hungry for connection, surrounded by networks, yet searching for community. And perhaps that is because those things are not the same. A network can connect people, a community can support them, a platform can create interaction, belonging creates meaning, and meaning may be one of the things humans need most. Not luxury, not status, not endless choices, meaning, the feeling that you matter, the feeling that your presence changes something, the feeling that you belong somewhere, to someone, to something, larger than yourself. As darkness settles over the village, our visitor reflects on this strange modern world, a world richer than any king could have imagined, more connected than any emperor could have dreamed, more informed than any scholar could have hoped, and yet still searching for something remarkably ancient, a place to belong. But soon, our visitor is about to encounter one final mystery, perhaps the strangest discovery of all. Not something modern people have gained, but something they may have lost, the ability to simply be, to exist without striving, without comparing, without optimizing, without chasing the next thing, and why that simple ability may have been one of the greatest hidden advantages of the medieval mind. Chapter 8. The Forgotten Art of Simply Being. Our medieval visitor has spent a long time observing the modern world. He has seen the endless choices, the endless entertainment, the endless comparisons, the endless futures people carry inside their minds. He has watched people search for connection, search for certainty, search for happiness, search for meaning. And after everything he has seen, he begins to notice something curious. Many modern people seem to be searching for things they occasionally already possess. Not because they are foolish, not because they are ungrateful, because they rarely have the opportunity to stop long enough to notice. Our visitor understands this. After all, it is difficult to appreciate where you are when your attention is constantly somewhere else. Perhaps that is the real story of modern life. Not technology, not social media, not smartphones. Attention, where it goes, what captures it, what holds it, and what happens when it becomes fragmented into thousands of tiny pieces. Because when attention becomes fragmented, life often feels fragmented too. A conversation becomes something to multitask through. A meal becomes something to consume quickly. A walk becomes something to optimize. A quiet evening becomes something to fill. And little by little, the present moment becomes increasingly difficult to experience. Our visitor would find this surprising, because for most of human history, the present was not a mindfulness exercise, it was simply where life happened. A baker baked bread, a shepherd watched sheep, a carpenter repaired a roof, a mother cared for her children. Most people were not trying to live in the present, they simply had fewer opportunities to escape it. Of course, they still worried, still dreamed, still remembered, still regretted. They were human, just like us. But their attention was often anchored by immediate reality, the weather, the season, the village, the work, the people around them, things that could be touched, seen, heard, experienced. And perhaps that created something many people quietly miss today, a sense of enough. Enough information, enough choices, enough stimulation, enough achievement, enough. Such a small word, and yet perhaps one of the most difficult words in the modern world. Because modern life is remarkably good at suggesting that whatever you have, there should always be more. More success, more productivity, more followers, more experiences, more growth, more improvement. And while growth can be wonderful, the pursuit of endless growth can become exhausting. Our visitor notices something interesting. The happiest moments he has witnessed during his journey through the modern world rarely involved more. They involved presence, a family sharing a meal, friends laughing together, a quiet conversation, a walk beneath the evening sky, someone reading a book, someone sitting peacefully with a cup of tea, someone watching rain fall against a window. Simple moments, ordinary moments, moments that would have felt familiar centuries ago. Because despite everything that has changed, human beings remain remarkably similar. We still seek connection, we still seek belonging, we still seek purpose, we still seek peace. The tools have changed, the environment has changed, the pace has changed, but the heart of the human experience remains surprisingly familiar. Our visitor finds comfort in that, because for much of his journey, modern life appeared impossibly different. Yet beneath the screens, beneath the choices, beneath the comparisons, beneath the noise, he discovered something ancient. The same hopes, the same fears, the same longing to feel understood, the same desire to build a meaningful life. Perhaps that is why people are often drawn to history, not because history is different, but because it reminds us how similar we really are. Across centuries, across cultures, across worlds, human beings remain human beings, and maybe that realization is strangely comforting, because it means that many of the struggles we experience today are not signs that something is wrong with us. They are signs that we are human, trying to navigate a world moving faster than any previous generation could have imagined. A world filled with extraordinary opportunities, extraordinary conveniences, extraordinary possibilities, and extraordinary distractions. No wonder it sometimes feels overwhelming. Our visitor certainly understands that now. In fact, he may understand it better than he did when he first arrived. Because when he first entered the modern world, he saw abundance. Now he sees attention. When he first saw smartphones, he saw technology. Now he sees human nature. When he first saw social media, he saw strange behavior. Now he sees ancient desires amplified by modern tools. And perhaps that is the lesson he will carry home. Not that medieval people were wiser, not that medieval people were happier, not that the past was better, because in many ways it certainly wasn't. Life was hard, often brutally hard. But there may be one thing the medieval world accidentally provided that the modern world sometimes struggles to protect. Space. Space to think, space to belong, space to be bored, space to rest, space to simply exist, without constant interruption, without constant comparison, without constant stimulation, just for a moment, just long enough to remember what it feels like to be present. And perhaps that is something worth preserving. As the night grows quieter, our visitor prepares to leave. The village paths fade into darkness, the distant sounds of modern life begin to disappear. The endless marketplace grows silent, the glowing rectangle grows dim, the comparisons fade, the future fades. And for a brief moment, there is only stillness. The same stillness that existed centuries ago, the same stillness that exists tonight, outside your window, above your roof, beneath the stars our visitor once knew, the stars your ancestors knew, the stars that continue shining quietly above us all, unconcerned with productivity, unconcerned with status, unconcerned with comparison, simply existing. And perhaps For tonight, that is enough. Good night, and thank you for joining me on this journey through the psychology of the medieval mind.